not as serious as had been speculated in some quarters. There is no damage to his anterior cruciate ligament. But Villa are moving quickly to replace Monchi. They've reached an agreement in principle with Roberto Olabe. It could be that we're heading for a bit of a tug of war between Chelsea and Manchester United for Maignan. He's 30 years old, he's a full French international, he's obviously got that body of work behind him at AC Milan.
Hi, I'm Oren Toner and I'm joined by talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook, who will be taking us through the biggest football stories of the day. Let's start with Arsenal summer signing Nini Madueke, who looks as though he'll be spending some time on the sidelines in a huge injury blow to Arsenal. What more can you give us on the situation, Crookie?
Yeah, this looked quite innocuous, really, at the weekend when Madueke was taken off at half-time against Manchester City. In fact, some of us in the press box were questioning, was it an injury or was it a tactical change from Mikel Arteta? It seemed unlikely it would be the latter because Madueke was probably Arsenal's biggest threat in that first half against City, and so it transpired after the game. But again, Mikel Arteta didn't seem overly concerned when he confirmed that Madueke had picked up a knock. We now know it's a knee injury, not as serious as had been speculated in some quarters. There is no damage to his anterior cruciate ligament, which is good news for Madueke because that would have been months, not weeks, on the sidelines. But it's unlikely we're going to see him again for at least 6 to 8 weeks. That's going to rule him out of the next international break when England have a friendly against Wales and another World Cup qualifier. I don't think he'll be fit to play in the two qualifiers in November either. And bearing in mind how well he's done under Thomas Tuchel, that's a big blow on a personal level. I guess for Arsenal, the disappointment of losing Madueke is partly compensated by the fact that Bukayo Saka is now back from injury. He came on at the weekend. But yeah, really disappointing, I think, for Madueke, who started the season for both club and country so well that he's going to be out for around 8 weeks. But I guess the saving grace is that it isn't any more serious than that.
With that injury, do you think we'll see more of Max Downman now playing a bit more of a role at Arsenal?
Not sure about that. I think Gabriel Martinelli might see it as an opportunity to get more minutes under his belt. He'd have been really disappointed that Leandro Trossard got the nod ahead of him against City at the weekend. Obviously came on and responded in the perfect manner by scoring that brilliant late equaliser. I would expect Martinelli to play against Port Vale in the EFL Cup live on talkSPORT on Wednesday, and maybe Downman will get some game time in that game. But I think at the moment Mikel Arteta is still conscious not to overplay Downman at such a young age, and just to break him slowly and gently into the rigours of first team football, particularly in the Premier League.
Right, now on to West Ham. Does the writing seem as if it's on the wall now for Graham Potter after another loss at the weekend?
I think so. This feels a little bit like history repeating. We all knew that Julian Lopetegui was for the axe probably even before he realised it. West Ham had been sounding out candidates. There was even pictures of Graham Potter meeting West Ham executives while Lopetegui was still in situ. And it looks like rinse and repeat as far as the Hammers are concerned. We know that David Sullivan has sounded out Slaven Bilic, former player, former manager, led them to 7th in the Premier League in his first spell in charge, about potentially returning to London Stadium. Karen Brady, I'm told, has met Nuno Espirito Santo. That was a story we broke exclusively on talkSPORT on Friday. Gary O'Neill's name has been thrown into the mix, another former West Ham player, although I make him the outsider at this moment in time. And there are other potential candidates. Edin Terzic, who led Borussia Dortmund to the Champions League final, was somebody the West Ham hierarchy looked at previously. I think the timing of the change is going to be interesting because they go to Everton on Monday night. That game is live and exclusive on talkSPORT. Then it's Arsenal away. They're the two games that West Ham have before the next international break, and I think they're pretty daunting fixtures for any new manager. So maybe Graham Potter will be given a stay of execution, but unless he does something quite dramatic in those two games, maybe repeats what he did at Arsenal last season when West Ham won 1-0, I do think, in your words, the writing is on the wall.
There has already been some unrest from the fans. How do you think they would react to these types of appointments and the names that the club has been linked to?
Well, I've got to say the reaction from West Ham fans since I mentioned Slaven Bilic potentially returning on Thursday has been mixed. I think a lot of people would like something new, and obviously Sullivan has a history of going back to the old. He did it with David Moyes, didn't he? And there is a saying in football, never go back. Where he might win the fans round, I'm told that Slaven Bilic, as part of his master plan, wants to appoint James Collins, potentially Mark Noble as well, and maybe other ex-West Ham players on his backroom team. And if he does that and they start well, then maybe the fans will buy into it. I think Nuno Espirito Santo is the one that West Ham fans want of the trio. But how keen is he to jump straight back in again, having left Nottingham Forest? I think financially, Bilic would be a cheaper option. And the terms of the deal, interesting as well. Bilic, I'm told, would be willing to come in on a short-term basis initially until the end of the season. That was the plan with Graham Potter before they gave him a longer-term contract. And I think David Sullivan would prefer just to hire someone who's going to steady the ship, keep them in the Premier League, and then review his options in the summer. Whether Nuno would take a short-term deal, I think is open to debate.
And West Ham fans have been very stringent in their way of looking at football, you know, the West Ham way. How would the fans react to Nuno's style of football? Do you think it would be a good fit?
No, I think that's another really good point, because obviously his success at Forest was built on not having much possession, hitting teams on the counter-attack. Do West Ham really have the weapons to play that way now that Mohamed Kudus is no longer their player? I would suggest no. There's a distinct lack of pace in the team. And you're right, West Ham fans do want to play a certain way. They want to be entertained as well as pick up results. Just ask Sam Allardyce, who led them to promotion to the Premier League, but West Ham fans never really bought into his philosophy. So I think that is another dilemma that David Sullivan will be wrestling with. Who is the right fit for this disjointed and mismatched West Ham squad? They lack pace, as I mentioned. They lack legs in midfield as well. And they lack goals, don't they? Callum Wilson started at the weekend and looked a long way short of being at his best. We haven't yet seen Nicholas Füllkrug really fully fit and fully firing. So this is not an easy job, especially when you throw into the mix they can't defend set pieces either.
Do the issues run deeper than just the manager? Because we've seen good managers come into the club, with the exception of Moyes, who did succeed at the club. Do the problems run deeper than that?
Well, he's been the only one really who's brought a sustained period of success. They've tried to go for the more established names. They replaced David Moyes with Pellegrini, gave him an awful lot of money to spend. That didn't work, and ultimately they had to go cap in hand back to David Moyes. Then they replaced him with Julian Lopetegui, which never really felt like the right fit. I think I said at the time, this is just the Spanish David Moyes in terms of the playing style. And the big complaint then from West Ham fans is that they weren't being entertained. The big issue that any West Ham manager has got is there are so many different voices who want to have an input. I've mentioned a couple of them already in David Sullivan and Karen Brady. Mark Noble, I think he's advocating potentially for the appointment of Gary O'Neill. You've got the Czech minority owner who has spoken to David Sullivan this week, and they've had a conflag about what direction to go in. Obviously, Graham Potter was allowed to bring in his own recruitment man in Carl McCauley, who we worked with at Chelsea and Brighton. If Potter goes, I would expect him to be replaced. They've already changed the sporting director because they didn't like the way that Tim Steighton was operating. So I think that the whole infrastructure at West Ham makes it very difficult for any manager to succeed. I think Pep Guardiola could go in there and have a difficult job on his hands.
Okay, brilliant. Now moving on to Aston Villa, who by their own standards have had a slow start to the Premier League season after what's many people would say is an underwhelming transfer window. But what's the situation with Unai Emery at the moment?
Well, it looks like one in, one out in terms of Aston Villa transfer chiefs. We got the bombshell announcement on Monday night that Monchi would be leaving the football club after just 2 years in charge. That felt significant because he was somebody handpicked by Unai Emery, the manager, to move Villa in a different direction. I think he was frustrated, Monchi, at the PSR restrictions that Villa have been a victim of for the past couple of seasons, actually. But really, they felt the pinch this summer. They missed out on a place in the Champions League when they lost at Manchester United on the last day of last season. They've since been forced to sell Jacob Ramsey. I know Monchi was keen to re-sign Marcus Rashford and Asensio. They were on loan, of course, in the second half of last season. I think it was always going to be a difficult deal to get Rashford back to the club. His heart was always set on Barcelona. But Asensio, in the end, ended up trading places for just €7 million. And Monchi among those at Villa that was surprised they couldn't get that deal done. I think the Villa hierarchy themselves have scratched their heads at some of Monchi's signings. You look at Amadou Onana. He was a club record buy. He's been injured more often than he's been fit. Donyell Marlin hasn't pulled up too many trees since he came in from Borussia Dortmund in January. And they've not suitably replaced John Duran in my book. And I think that's probably why Ollie Watkins is struggling as well without that added competition to spur him on. But Villa are moving quickly to replace Monchi. They've reached an agreement in principle with Roberto Olabe. He was the former transfer chief at Real Sociedad, did some really good work there. Crucially, he's known to Unai Emery, so that should silence some of the noise around the Villa manager's future. He's got a really frustrated figure early in the season. He had a row after one game with our own Sam Matterface. He turned on his own players after they failed to beat 10-man Sunderland at the weekend. I think there was a genuine concern from some attached to Aston Villa that Emery may follow Monchi. That could still happen if Monchi, for example, goes back to Sevilla, where he had so much success before. I'm sure Unai Emery would be a target. But at the moment, I think Villa are hoping that because they've replaced Monchi so quickly, that will just quieten some of the speculation. They need results, though, Aston Villa, because the season is in danger of going away from them. They're certainly not Champions League contenders as they have been in the past couple of seasons.
Okay, now on to Chelsea, and they're looking to strengthen in the goalkeeping department, but they face some competition from an unexpected Premier League club. What more can you tell us on the situation, Crookie?
Yeah, this is Mike Maignan, the player they tried to sign from AC Milan just before the Club World Cup. They had a £25 million offer rejected, decided not to revisit their interest after that tournament had finished. They put their faith in Robert Sanchez. I think we saw at Old Trafford at the weekend that he is still a bit of a liability with that rush of blood. Got himself sent off early on, and that's got the goalkeeping topic right at the top of the agenda as far as Chelsea supporters are concerned. I would expect Chelsea to go back in for Maignan, not least because he's out of contract at the end of the season, therefore is available on a free transfer. But with that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if they face a bit of competition from other Premier League clubs, from some of their rivals, the likes of Manchester United. I know that Ruben Amorim, having let Andre Onana go out on loan to Trabzonspor, and it doesn't look like he wants to return to the football club anytime soon, is looking potentially to bring in somebody more experienced. They've got Altay Bayındır, who started the season as number one, but he's made some mistakes already. They've signed Senna Lemons, obviously coming in from Royal Antwerp, but he's still really inexperienced. So it could be that we're heading for a bit of a tug of war between Chelsea and Manchester United for Maignan. He's 30 years old. He's a full French international. He's obviously got that body of work behind him at AC Milan. And on a free transfer, it looks like a no-brainer to me for one of those big Premier League clubs to swoop in.
And specifically on Manchester United there, when Lamens was brought in, surely that was to be United's number one. They couldn't have been expecting to come into the Premier League season with Bayındır as their number one. What's going on there?
Well, it's really interesting because the briefings coming out of Old Trafford after the first couple of games of the season, obviously Altay made a big mistake against Arsenal. Onana didn't cover himself in glory in that League Cup defeat against Grimsby, probably at fault for both of their goals in normal time, and wasn't great in the penalty shootout either. But United was still stressing at that point that the goalkeeper wasn't seen as a priority position. They weren't going to spend big on a number one. Then the Emi Martinez links resurfaced, and it looked like going into deadline day that he would be a live option. Senna Lemons was a name that was given to me much earlier in the window. Back in June, I think I first reported interest in him for talkSPORT. I do think at that point they were looking at him as one for the future as opposed to coming in and being the number one. But because they've let Onana go, maybe that is what is going to happen, although Altay is keeping his place at the moment. But that just backs up, really, that I think Ruben Amorim feels he needs somebody more experienced to step up to the party and then allow the younger goalkeeper to develop at a much slower pace. It's a big club, Manchester United, to be thrown in straight at the deep end. Even David De Gea found that in his early days after signing for Sir Alex Ferguson when the club was obviously in a much better place.
Thank you very much for that, Crookie.
No problem.